Is lying by omission deceitful? And is deceit dependent on a person's good/bad intentions? I, 48F, didn't share my sexual past early in our relationship, but fully intended to tell him, 50M. Eventually, he says I lied and deceived him. How do I rebuild trust? Has anyone been in a relationship with someone whose past, and or their failure to disclose it openly, negatively impacted the relationship? Were you able to rebuild trust, and did you manage to forgive them? Background: I, 48 female, met him, 50 male, during middle age. Initially, we were in a long-distance relationship and fell in love. It felt beautiful, closer than anything I had previously experienced. The connection was intense and became serious quickly. It has been the most profound love I have ever felt. We have now been together for 5 years. He is extremely unhappy and wants to end the relationship, and this has been the case for some time, fluctuating between highs and lows. The reason my past did not surface early on is that it was far from ordinary. Trigger warning: explicit content that includes sexual assault. I have a significant sexual trauma history. I was a victim of sexual assault, rape, at the age of 16. This experience led to diminished self-worth and years of poor choices, likely compounded by an inclination to be overly trusting and a failure to advocate for myself. The gravest errors I made included a brief but violent relationship, being an escort for a year, and attempting suicide, all while I was still a teenager. Over the years, I sought therapy and managed to get my life back on track for the most part. I returned to school, built a career, and enjoyed several loving relationships with kind, good men. In my late 30s, in my desperation for a family, I made another mistake: a relationship with an alcoholic who eventually became the father of my child. I love my child and have no regrets about that. I failed to recognize the father's alcohol and mental health problems when we first met. Unsurprisingly, the relationship did not endure. When we separated, I felt relieved yet fearful of life as a single parent, perceiving myself as a massive failure. In the aftermath, I did not conduct myself in ways I can take pride in. Approximately 6 months after splitting from my child's father, I joined Tinder. Over the next couple of years, I had a few brief liaisons, not one-night stands, but more like dating for a month or so, with beginnings that did not lead anywhere. Most of my Tinder dates consisted of coffee meetings, nothing even remotely sexual. However, the experience felt quite disheartening, and I was convinced that I would never find a life partner. Regrettably, during this period, feeling quite worthless and not relationship material, I had an encounter with a married man from Tinder. We had sex a couple of times, but when I realized he was unsettling and potentially a serial cheater, I blocked him. During this same time, with one individual I dated for a few months, I attempted oral sex for the first time. Despite my age, and even after my traumatic past, I had never engaged in that act before. These details emerged later and ended up damaging my relationship. For the record, I am not proud of the actions I took during that disconnected period. Fast forward, I deleted my Tinder account. Then I met my partner in person through friends. We established a deep connection. He is kind, gentle, funny, and incredibly intelligent, handsome with a voice and eyes that captivate me. Our conversations ran deep, and the physical connection was so strong it awakened my sexuality. I felt loved, attractive, and my body felt truly responsive, which many survivors of past sexual assault may understand as a disconnection that often exists. 2 months into our relationship, he sensed something about my sexual history. During those initial months filled with talking and texting, I disclosed my experience of sexual assault. I felt I had healed significantly from that trauma. The greatest challenge is the abiding sense that society views you as damaged. I believe that stigma made me hesitant to share too much too soon. Then one night, he expressed curiosity about whether I had ever been a prostitute. This caught me off guard. He recounted a time he visited a brothel with a friend when he was younger. Although he did not visit a prostitute himself, just waited at the bar, he implied that I might have been there or that someone who resembled me had been. I was astonished. I had never visited the place he described, and he was speculating about my past. At that moment, I stated, "I have never been in that place," which was true, but I failed to disclose that I had engaged in sex work. Why didn't I tell him right then? I believe it stemmed from fear of being judged. I intended to share everything about myself, but I wanted him to know me better and feel that I had long moved past those troubled times. Of course, it was selfish. I didn't want to lose him. I was falling in love and wanted him to love me in return. He questioned me again about this and began to ask if I was hiding anything, sensing that there were aspects I was withholding. Some of his inquiries were rather peculiar, such as asking if I was a spy or if I was being blackmailed. I struggled to interpret his questions. Ultimately, I ended up disclosing my history with sex work 4 months later, 6 months into our relationship. We spoke on the phone and later in person about it. Initially, I felt relieved, as he did not appear to judge me. His understanding deepened my trust and affection for him. However, over the years, as he pondered my past, the more he felt hurt and believed I had lied. It increasingly seemed that he did judge me. More than once, he remarked on how he could not be with someone who had been a prostitute. He expressed disgust, claiming how could I not have revealed this to him. I sometimes thought he equated it with promiscuity. Unable to comprehend it did not equate to that. I began to feel deeply ashamed of my past again, regressing and experiencing horrible flashbacks of events I thought I had buried through therapy. I returned to counseling, both for myself and because I did not want my past to burden him or jeopardize our relationship. It took me a long time to realize that he suffers from anxiety and is autistic. Looking back, I wish I had understood this sooner or had even a vague notion of what it meant for communication. I believe that knowledge would have helped me communicate more specifically and directly. As people can fixate on certain ideas, I can be rather vague and often process my thoughts as I articulate them. Our differing communication styles led to misunderstandings early on, especially through text messages. And these misunderstandings were compounded by his developing notion that I was being untruthful. Therefore, innocent actions, such as when I exited work 20 minutes late while he waited outside growing anxious, or if I changed our meeting location at the last moment, sparked anxiety as he felt disrespected and upset. To me, it was merely running late or being flexible. Additionally, early in our relationship, my more recent sexual and dating history emerged awkwardly and in fragments. This included exchanges that occurred while texting and flirting. I mentioned my encounter with the married man. I had misinterpreted the conversation, thinking "make me jelly" indicated being turned on instead of jealous, and thought we were being playful in a risque way. Months later, he voiced his shock, hurt, and anger about this conversation. Since then, he has maintained that I boasted about my experience with a married man. The oral sex came up as well. Early in our sexual relationship, we attempted that act, and in the heat of the moment, I uttered the phrase, "FCK my face." Later, when he asked why I said that, I had no explanation beyond, "I don't know." A month or so later, I reflected on the situation and discussed it with him, explaining how various factors, perhaps seeing that younger person, the influence of pornography, experimental impulses, and underlying self-image issues combined. However, I emphasized that I did not want to be degraded or to degrade anyone in any way. I articulated how I now realized that behavior was inappropriate and not something I should have introduced into our sexual experiences. I had hoped that opening up would help him understand the sources of that behavior. Instead, he labeled me a pervert during a phone call. It was a painful moment. From our early months together until around 8 months in, when he learned everything about me, including my sleeping with a person we both knew, when we thought we might see them at a party, he began to believe I was dishonest, citing instances where I selectively omitted information, taking part in risky behavior. I acknowledged that I occasionally did err. For example, I referred to an acquaintance one time as a friend, but later clarified that I had slept with that individual, not someone he had ever met, by the way. Certainly, that could be interpreted as partially revealing. The accusations of risky behavior were challenging for me as well. On one occasion, I shared a taxi back from the airport for work. 2 businessmen were in the back, while I sat in front with the driver, but he viewed this as highly irresponsible. To me, it was simply carpooling, so I was perplexed by some of the things he considered objectionable. Nonetheless, there were numerous examples that seemed to weave a distorted image of me in his mind: promiscuous, overly sexual, a risk-taker, and a liar. In contrast to my history, he was in a relationship for about 14 years and had primarily been single since that ended. He had never tried online dating, regarding it as an avenue purely for casual encounters. Although he did not sit me down early on to disclose his entire past, he eventually shared things, including having had several sexual partners and having cheated multiple times during his long-term relationship. I did not feel as troubled by the fact that he revealed this information later, even though it was negative behavior. It was simply his history, and I loved him in the present. I believed that the past belonged to the past, unless it involved issues such as sexually transmitted infections, substance abuse, or legal troubles. However, I began to feel judged unfairly for my own past. He frequently insisted that it wasn't merely the past but how I had omitted details, and in his perspective, lied intending to deceive him. Yet, he also started to intensely focus on the past itself, and that became cruel. He frequently labeled me a liar, referred to me as sexually aggressive and a slut, and one night, he even looked up the definition of slut in the dictionary, reading it to me as proof of his viewpoint. He struggled to trust me, soon believing I had done things I never actually did. He suspected I had cheated, flirted with his friends, and ogled strangers' accusations like these filled our discussions. No amount of my apologies, crying, or begging over the following 4 years changed his mind. I acknowledged that I could have addressed my past sooner, but I have remained 100% loyal and devoted to him both physically and emotionally, and my love for him persists. Not once have I considered any other man. I believed he had genuinely lost his way, and I disliked the way he treated me. I held on to hope that we could find a resolution. Throughout the years, I have endeavored in many ways to demonstrate my love for him through actions, aiming to rebuild trust and seek his forgiveness. I have tried to be dependable in the smallest of things. However, it felt as though he could not see my contrition or recognize the loving partner before him. Over time, the hurt consumed him. He became upset and angry, expressed a desire to avoid socializing together, and we began drinking at home each night, endlessly rehashing my lies and his hurt. Eventually, he communicated that he had stopped loving me, despite remaining in the relationship, claiming his feelings had changed. Summary: how do you rebuild trust if you have not actually been unfaithful? And when is the appropriate time to disclose your sexual history to your significant other? My failure to reveal everything early on has harmed my relationship. He believes I was intentionally deceitful, meaning I intended to deceive him. I felt my intentions were good, but indeed my process of opening up was far from perfect. However, I was not lying. We appear unable to navigate the turmoil we find ourselves in. Story 2. I, 21, reached out to my high school boyfriend, 23M, I almost had a baby with. Years ago, when I was in high school, I dated an upperclassman and we really connected. We were completely inseparable for months, very intense right from the start. As the months passed, I began to show signs of declining mental health, and he did his utmost to support me through it. That winter, I became seriously ill, and after a visit to the doctor, we discovered that I was pregnant. My ex is an exceptionally family-oriented and religious person, and he immediately proposed to me, stating he would find a job, discontinue his studies, and do whatever was necessary to support us. At that time, not yet even 17 years old, I was absolutely terrified and unsure if that was the path I wanted for my life, or if I would ever regain a say in my future. We opted to have an abortion at my doctor's recommendation, who believed I would not have been able to carry the pregnancy to term due to my age and size. This stress, combined with the challenges of pregnancy hormones, severely impacted our relationship, leading to a fairly messy breakup around April of that year, with minimal contact in the years that followed. Over the years, I made every effort to rebuild my life and move forward, and for the most part, I would say I have been quite successful. However, occasionally, I am struck by increasingly overwhelming waves of grief, not over the child, but over the friendship I cherished and lost in that relationship. The grief has pushed me to extreme points. I have experienced significant suicidal thoughts, which prompted me to seek therapy. While therapy is helpful, it does not provide a real solution. However, as of last year, my ex and I found ourselves at the same university, and although over 60,000 students attend this school, I find myself searching for him everywhere. even though it has been approximately 6 years since we parted ways. I have spent countless hours discussing these feelings with friends, family, and professionals to no avail. The most common advice I receive is, if it's truly that difficult, you should reach out to him. To which my response is always, and say what? The truth is, for a long time, I hesitated to reach out because I believed that if he felt as hurt as I did, he would not want to see or hear from me, and I did not want to cause him any additional pain. However, the other day, something finally snapped. I resorted to the most straightforward form of communication I know and added him on Snapchat. I'm not sure why or what gave me the courage, but I did it, not knowing if he even used the app anymore, and to my surprise, his name appeared on my phone with a message. We had a long conversation about everything that transpired between us. I was forthright and told him that I really do think about him constantly, despite my best intentions. I apologized for reaching out and expressed my hope that he is achieving everything he desires in life. He was very gracious throughout the conversation, stating that he was thankful to have known me, that I was one of the most significant women in his life, and that he held no resentment toward me. This conversation healed a part of me, as I had assumed he did not care and had not thought of me, or if he did, he must have hated me, all misconceptions which he confirmed were false. I felt extremely grateful to have this conversation with him and expressed a desire to know if we could be friends in the future. He replied, "Ooh, I'd have to think about that one. Exes aren't typically friends, and just having you on my phone is a lot. I feel like I can text you and reach out, and I don't know." I acknowledged his feelings and assured him that I would not contact him further if I was allowed to remain on his phone, and we both wished each other well. It has been 3 weeks since that interaction, and I wish I could say it resolved everything, that I received the closure I needed and could finally move on, but that is not the case. I want to be in the same room with him intentionally. I want to inquire about his day and genuinely listen when he shares. I want to learn things about him and be known by him. These desires may be selfish, but it feels as though my body aches for them. I recently brought this situation up to a good friend, asking what he would do in my position, and he offered support in navigating the feelings my ex might be experiencing. I explained that I simply would like to see him, and he suggested I invite my ex for coffee without any expectations, just coffee. I nearly cried at the suggestion, primarily because the thought of actually seeing him was overwhelming, and I said I would consider it. I did think about it, and concluded that the worst he could say is no, and I am contemplating sending him a text after Valentine's Day to suggest meeting up for coffee. I know many of you will wonder why I would do this and what I truly want from it. I wish I could provide a clear answer, but have you ever loved someone so deeply that your entire mind, body, and soul long for them, even when you know they are not returning? I wish I could move on, as most people would suggest, but this is one thing I am unwilling to release. If I never try, I will never know, and I will always regret it. I cannot continue to live like this anymore. So here I am, at my supposed adult age, crying into my phone because I am terrified of losing someone I have already lost.